Thank you. So I want to bring in now Dave Richards or Giles Grover to start telling us about some of the cladding scandals. Hi, Giles.
Hiya, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. So Giles is from Manchester Gladiators. So I think we have three people presenting on cladding. So you have about 10-15 minutes each. We could ask a few, I think we could maybe allow some questions after you and Dave Richards, and then I'll have more questions after Alex. So I'll let you get on, because if you explain who you are and tell us what you feel we should know.
Sure. Yeah, just to echo what Harry said, thank you for inviting us to the forum and all the work you're doing, Katie. Really appreciate raising awareness of the issue, which is kind of why we set up 2 long years ago. Myself, I've been kind of involved in this in one way or the other since July 2017, following Grenfell. And so the Manchester Gladiators, we formed sort of the end of 2018, early 2019. And the End Our Cladding Scandal campaign is something we formed with UK Cladding Action Group and Inside Housing in April 2019. So we've kind of been stuck in this, fighting it for the last 2 years. So completely appreciate that everyone's kind of at different stages as well. And once you enter it, you just, it's kind of mind blowing, and the whole unfairness of it is kind of crazy, really. So what we said to with Dave and Alex is that we've come in fairly more pandit from the End Our Cladding Scandal campaign. I'm going to talk about the history of the campaign and where we are now. And Dave, essentially from London Cladding Action Group, is going to talk over the mental health aspects. And one of the things we always focus on financial health, and people don't always think about the mental health, and especially during the pandemic and the effects that this crisis has had on us. And then Alex is also going to be looking at setting up an action group and what more residents can do to kind of raise awareness of the situation we're all in, because that's the main thing. That's what we're focusing on, is increasing the publicity. The more it's in the media, the more MPs, people are talking about it, the more we're hopeful we'll get towards a solution. So there has been some progress over the last 2 years, but as we all know, that we're still not quite at the end. There's been some positive announcements, or potentially positive announcements, this week for people in buildings below 80 metres, which I'll touch upon later as well. So haven't done any slides or anything, so you just have to kind of put up in my face the next 15 minutes or so. And those who know me know I can talk a fair bit, so try to keep it brief as well, and obviously happy to answer any questions at the end of it. So yes, so it's kind of difficult to know where to start. In theory, I could go back 40 years, could go back to a fire in 2009, but we'll talk about a lot of these issues have come to the forefront since the tragedy at Grenfell, when obviously 72 people died, and since then the government, for the right reasons, is focusing on safety. But what has been uncovered, as per the Dame Hackett's review of building regulations, is very much clear that the building regulatory system was inadequate for decades. This essentially allowed developers, those in the construction industry, to gain the system. And it was a race to the bottom, as Dame Hackett reported it, and it focused on profits over safety. Again, as Harry said, subcontracting, or as Daniel Zeichner said recently, just a lot of subcontracting going on. Everyone focused on the profit margins, knowing that there wasn't really any real oversight from building control in terms of the intrusive assessments to say, yes, you've definitely built what you've definitely built. So government, following the Grenfell tragedy, issued a number of advice notes. I think the first sort of main one that affected us was the advice note 14, which is the end of December 2018. It was designed to give clear advice to building owners. So building owners is sort of this catch-all term that is used, that isn't always appropriate, because it can involve its landlords, freeholders. It can also involve residential management companies and right to manage companies in terms of their responsibilities on site under the law. So the problem with advice note 14 was it was designed for the right reasons to give advice, but it just led to a lot of confusion. Flat sales started being affected, obtaining mortgages was quite difficult. So following that period, a number of groups started coming together across the country. And as I said, it was early 2019, I think April 2019 was the launch of the End Our Cladding Scandal campaign, initially with the UK Cladding Action Group and ourselves Inside Housing. Since then, as people are aware, and as some people are still finding out on a day-by-day basis, that the issue is just has been getting worse and worse, or more complex or wider spread across the whole country, well, across Wales as well, in Scotland, although Scotland doing something slightly different. So it is a very complex situation, but as I said, our view is fairly simple in terms of, and it's something that is echoed by the Housing Communities Local Government Select Committee, which is a really good committee to follow. Their reports are great. I've got time for background reading. I'd probably look at their most recent cladding report, which was issued at the end of April. The simple point is that leaseholders are the only ones that are, or residents, as the term leaseholder is a bit of a, it's not the best term really, because it feels it dehumanizes us a little bit. So residents, we're the only ones that are faultless or not at blame for this issue that we're in. The cause is the regulations, because they were gameable for years. There's clear recommendation to government to update them, but they didn't. So as people who've been following the Grenfell inquiry have seen and will see in October when the role of politicians comes in, that there was a lot of sitting on hands really, and just ignoring what was clearly strong advice, whether it's from experts, whether it's from some of the government's advisors. So when we formed in 2019, there was funding for ACM removal. ACM cladding is the same cladding as was on the Grenfell Tower, excuse me. There was funding for social housing to remove it. One of our kind of early wins, it's clear that we weren't really going to be able to remediate in private buildings due to the cost. So in May 2019, the ACM fund was announced, which is 200 million. Although at that point, we did know that there were a lot of other building safety issues because of the advice notes that were being issued by the government's expert panel. So again, I'll try to keep it brief. As I said, I could give you a month-by-month account, but towards the end of 2019, it was that the EWS1 form was created, which I'm sure most of you will have heard of now. Industry-led solution. However, literally a few weeks later, the government issued consolidated advice notes on the 20th of January 2020, which said that external walls should be checked for all buildings of all heights. That, since then, that's dragged hundreds of thousands, millions of people into this. Some people still don't know they're in this mess. Hopefully this week, so some of the movements might take them out of it, but we've seen announcements by government before that seem positive that haven't quite followed through, should we say. So after some fairly intense lobbying in 2020, including meetings with Robert Jenrick, we managed to secure £1 billion in funding for non-ACM. We did welcome this at the time, but even then we knew we still needed more. So we came back together, a number of the groups in 2020, and we discussed relaunching our campaign. So we did that at the end of September 2020, alongside the Sunday Times. And Martina Lees is great journalist. She's been following this since, for the last 2 or 3 years. So we came together with Inside Housing and Sunday Times to relaunch the campaign. We've got 10 steps, which I won't detail them here, but we're happy to put them in the chat later, or maybe we can do a little briefing paper after this if it might feel useful. Since September, we've been lobbying intensely. We've got a lot of politicians on site, cross-party politicians as well. We're focusing on the media as well. One of the things is that whatever media, whatever stripe the media is, whatever political persuasion, everyone can recognise the simple unfairness, whether it's the Guardian, the Times, the Sun, the Telegraph. Every single newspaper is understanding of what an unfair issue is and is reporting they call them case studies, but they're personal stories. And this is something that can be forgotten, that there are real humans behind this, that when we talk about the millions to fix a building, the billions to fix it across the country, there are real human beings behind it. So that's what we try to really get out in the media, saying these are the people who are affected, from first-time buyers to people who want to move out and start build because they've got 1 or 2 babies. I've seen some families with 3 children living in a 1-bedroom flat as well. I've got pensioners who've invested for a nest egg who are now paying out a lot more than they're actually getting in for income. So one of the things that we do say is it affects everyone. If it doesn't affect yourself, then it might affect your friends. So what we also want people to do, and again, I'll come on to it later, I think I've talked 10 minutes straight already. So is we are encouraging people to lobby their MPs, whichever MP it is, Conservative MPs particularly, because of the the legislation that's going through Parliament right now. So long story short, there have been some successes in terms of 30 million that was allocated to the Waking Watch, they call it a Waking Watch Relief Fund, but it's essentially to install alarms in buildings over 80 metres. That was some help, but we called for it for months. Unfortunately, we know that that's not nearly enough. Our concern is that the government is focusing on media management, because there was actually a building in Sheffield that was due to be prohibited, and the day after, the 30 million Waking Watch Relief Fund was announced. So in February as well, Robert Jenrick came out with a statement on February the 10th about 3.5 billion extra funding. However, there's still a lot of detail lacking in that. One of the majorly unfair things that is in there is what we call it the cladding tax loan scheme. So they've initiated a £50 a month maximum loan scheme for people in buildings below 18 metres. However, again, we say it's quite simple. Why should the people in buildings over 18 metres get help when those under 18 metres are forced into a loan scheme that, despite being announced in February, despite being told there'll be details of it, we're told now it'll be September before we get any further information. So there has been movement over the last, if I take a step back over 2 years, we have got somewhere, but obviously the pain we're feeling right now, the more people that are still affected by it, the fact that we've got a number of issues still with insurances, interim measure costs. So building insurance is increasing dramatically. A lot of people are telling us they're paying hundreds of pounds a month on that. You've got the Waking Watch, which essentially is an ineffective tool, we find, and that's probably putting it mildly. And we have worked with the National Fire Chiefs Council to push them to really give clearer advice about installing alarms. So the last bit of that is we need government to install the alarms, to fund installing the alarms, because again, these issues are not our fault. They're caused by weak regulations for 30, 40 years, and developers, whether in over 18 metres or under 18 metres, and subcontractors have been allowed to get away with all sorts of bad practices or despicable practices, as the Minister for Building Safety, Lord Greenhouse, called it. So fast forward to this year, in terms of, we had the fire safety bill going through Parliament. That was related to checking external walls. We took the opportunity, once Baroness Pinnock in the House of Lords raised an amendment 13 in November, we worked alongside Conservative MPs Stephen McPartland and Royston Smith to table amendments that will protect us. We didn't think it had much chance of getting through, but those of you will notice that all have seen what's known as ping pong going back between the House of Lords and House of Commons that many times. And so one of the frustrating things now is that a lot of the ministers, the Conservative MPs have been told by the government that, don't worry, we'll look at historical remediation costs and who pays in the building safety bill. So let's let the fire safety bill pass. Well, the fire safety bill has passed, and there isn't really enough in the building safety bill to protect us. There is an extension to the Defective Premises Act, the limitation period people can take action, which we welcome in principle, although the government has been told by the National Audit Office that it's probably pointless asking people who are stuck in this crisis to take that action, because the costs are still prohibitive. There's a lot of special purpose vehicles that have been made insolvent, and it will impact the pace of remediation. So it is positive for some people in the future, but we still feel we don't really have enough comfort around who will pay, because a lot of us are in buildings, whether you're over 18 metres, you've got cladding issues, you've got a range of other issues as well. So average cost to fix funded issues around £25,000. There's analysis being done, it's an average cost around £23,000 to fix the non-cladding issues, the non-funded issues. So we still have to find a lot of money to make our buildings safe. You can't make a building half safe, as many MPs have said in Parliament. So just to touch upon this week's announcement, it was slightly rushed out. It's something we've called for a long time. When we relaunched our campaign, when we met Robert Jenrick in November as well to talk about a proportionate approach to risk. So it's not just a case of got to remediate everything, because the problem is the consolidated advice notes in January 2020 caused a lot of buildings of a zero risk approach to permeate, where you're told every single building has to remediate everything. It is positive that they're pushed towards more risk mitigation for under 18 metre buildings. It's a little late. We still need to see how it will play out in the market. But I would say to those of you who are in under 18 metre buildings, again, we can share the link in the chat or on a briefing note, read through the expert statement. I think it's paragraph 13, where it does say that any buildings that have been assessed already or where being told you've got to have expensive remediation, to have a review of that as well. To an under 18 metres building, the advice is that because there's a lower risk to life, that you shouldn't have to remediate, so you should be able to have alarms or sprinklers. So just to finally touch upon the building safety bill, it passed its second reading this week. We do have the committee stage where it's essentially scrutinised line by line in September. Still a few months to go, so we're really focusing our efforts over the coming weeks in lobbying all the Conservative MPs. We've got a coalition of about 30 from the fire safety bill. We're looking to build on that. The Conservatives, the party of home ownership and fairness, I think they recognise the issue. It's whether we can get enough of them to actually vote against their government. We're also looking at engaging the SNP as well, because that's one thing that we could, be really useful in terms of breaking into that majority. So I'll leave it there for now. I could go on and on, as you can probably tell, but happy to provide some more links and some more resources, because we do help with letters, etc., templates that leaseholders, residents, friends and family can send out as well. So with some soft talk, that's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you, Giles. All that information we'll put in the report that comes out. Thank you. Dave, welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. And can I also say thank you for inviting me today. My name's Dave Richards. I am an affected leaseholder. I live in London. I live in Greenwich, and I'm in a block where it's covered in what they term EPS, which is a form of polystyrene that's highly inflammable. So I'm recognising this firsthand as well. Just a little bit about London CAG. We formed London CAG a year ago last February, and it was really formed out of UK CAG, one of the big national bodies, and that was to give London a separate voice. We were always conscious that the problem in London was huge. We've got roughly around about 60% of the tower blocks with these issues in London, so it's a huge difficulty today. Now, what I wanted to talk to you about today was partly about the impact on people that this building safety crisis is actually causing, because there's a huge impact. But I also want to look at some of the things that we can do. And I know there's a lot of councillors on the call today, and I'm also one of our things that we're trying to do, because while we believe that most of this is a central government issue, and it is, I don't think there's any doubt about that, we work with a number of councils who become our supporters, and also what they can do in their roles to help their residents, leaseholders that they've got in their area. So I want to be a little bit challenging around that as well. So the first thing I thought I would start with to reflect on what it's like on the ground. And we did a mental health survey over the last 2 years. We've updated it. So I thought I'd give you some quotes from it. So the first one leaseholder said to us, "My entire life has been on hold for the last 2 years. I lie awake at night thinking about how to get out of the building. If the cladding just meters from my head goes up in flames. My mental health has been totally destroyed." So you almost think about that, and I just want to give this into perspective about how combustible some of this cladding is. One of the technical experts in Grenfell said the cladding there was like pouring 32 litres of petrol onto the building. Now, I find it difficult actually to conceptualise what 32 litres of petrol look like, but it's almost equivalent to 600 cars full of petrol, or 3 or 4 tankers load. So it's a real problem that we've got. Another quote from another leaseholder: "I have been left utterly broken by this. My mental and physical health has worsened. I have severe anxiety, depression. I struggle each day to keep myself alive." So the stories that we're hearing are really powerful, and they're heartbreaking at times, some of the things that we're picking up. And I just reflect on the mood of government at the moment, because we've also had and seen a letter from Robert Jenrick replying to one leaseholder that was expressing that he was having anxiety difficult. And the suggestion came back was, well, you can seek the help of the Samaritans. And you just sit back and say, wow. But that's been part of the problem and the difficulty. Just in terms of other things that our surveys picked up, 1 in 4 people have said they've taken time off work or study. 7 out of 10 say they're having sleeping difficulties. And I just reflect on that. And I know local government's a big employer of people. There'll be lots of people working in local government that are affected by this. What's the impact on the work that they are actually doing? And that's true for all workers across all industries. 28% said they had put starting a family on hold. 23% said they'd had suicidal feelings or a desire to self-harm. That's a huge percentage. That's 1 in 4 people affected by this scandal from our sample. So, and what we're seeing is this crisis is going to go on a long time by the time that we remediate all these buildings. And that's going to be a huge cost to the NHS, the economy, to families. It is a mental health crisis. And I just ponder, and I know a lot of councils have public health responsibilities, and actually how are we using that to support our residents caught up in this area. Now, I know when I've looked around and spoken to a number of public health bodies, and certainly around flood issues, there's lots of information and support going out. How much is actually going out to residents on the building safety crisis that we've got? So I think we can look at that and actually do something to support them. What I'm just going to do, hopefully, because just in case you do want to, bear with me, I'll probably do it. I think it might be coming through. There should be a link in the chat which shows our survey that you can read later at your leisure. It's quite a detailed document, and it will go into a little bit more of these circumstances. The other thing I wanted to say, particularly about local councils, obviously, and Giles mentioned this, we've got 10 steps that we are campaigning on. Basically, they are pressing government to put up the funding up front to remediate the buildings, because otherwise that's not going to happen. The leaseholders don't have the money to do it, and then go after those people that are responsible for this crisis, and that will be the developers as the main problem, but there's other people that are involved. There's the manufacturers of all the cladding, and what we've been asking local authorities to do is actually to sign up to those 10 campaign aims that we've got. And we've got a number that have actually adopted them, I'm pleased to say. And I've just put our campaign aims in there that you can link into our website, and it's got some details. And I probably, and I know time's short at the moment, I'm going to just concentrate on 2. We've got Newham here in London. Of course, I deal with the London one, so apologies for that. And Tower Hamlets. Newham's an interesting one. They signed up to be a supporter and back off 10 steps. But they're also looking at putting pressure on the developers who have still not remediated blocks in their area. And they're going to take that into account. Now, I appreciate that's difficult, because in terms of planning legislation, there's difficulties of doing anything in that light. There's some difficulties around tendering that we do and what business that we're giving out. But certainly they are looking into that, which is good. Tower Hamlets, you might not be aware of the area, but you will have seen probably recently the New Providence Walls fire on the news, which was a fire in a tower block. Now, there was a number of issues there that people have been saying. One, the difficulty is when the fire brigade turned up, they didn't have a fire engine with a long enough ladder to get up to the height of the fire. Now, what Tower Hamlets are doing is they're looking at their Section 106 money to say, how can we use that? And actually they're contemplating, and the mayor's contemplating there at the moment, of whether they work with the fire service to actually purchase a turntable ladder to get there. We've also had discussions, because there was an issue about water pressure in the area, with the water board, Thames Water, to see what are the issues, are they genuine? So it's one of those where local government can come together with the other public sector bodies to actually look at this in a more holistic light, to see whether, you know, there's things that we can do to actually improve the fire safety and actually improve the chances of people surviving these fires, and of course our fire service as well, that they're not exposed to danger. So certainly those are the issues that they are looking at the moment. I'm grateful for them to doing that, and we will continue to work with local authorities to get them signed up to be supporters. The other thing that we're doing as a campaign is, and you may well have seen some of our protests, we're having local protests at sales offices of various builders, because while we feel that they're not taking real action to actually address this problem, we want people to know that that's going on. We're also looking about investments into those builders. We're looking at ESG investors, or they claim to be, so that people that are investing in environment, social and corporate governance issues that have come to light, to see the type of company that they're protecting. So again, the challenge is, what are the investments people are making? Pension funds, big investors, what can we do there, and how does that work? So that's some of our work that's going on in the background as well. But I think, because I know we're slightly over time, just to sum up, you know, from my view of what's going on, and I think everybody is agreeing what we see is a lot of shoddy work in tower block buildings, and I think we need to see obviously the government step up, because it's only the government that can really solve this crisis, but we also need a systematic change, a change in culture in the building industry. And what we've also experienced that's been going on is a blame culture, and that hasn't helped anybody. If it's not a blame culture, it's a blame avoidance that people have sat back and tried to do, and that's ended up is actually probably the most innocent party that's caught up in this scandal is actually then meeting the cost. And what it needs is a revolve of everybody in the industry to come together with the residents to actually solve this. But the underlying thing that we do need, and we haven't got at the moment, is we need the political will of the government to solve this crisis.
Thank you so much, Dave. Really appreciate that. Really quite hard listening to some of the stories.
Yeah.
I think Alex is going to come in now. Hello, Alex.
Hi, Katie. Thank you for this opportunity, and thank you to Giles and Dave for explaining so much. We could talk about the cladding scandal for hours and hours. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about how I set up Ipswich Gladiators back in December 2020. And we have a desire or a plan for more towns and cities across the east of England specifically to launch their own cladding action group or campaign groups, however you want to describe them, so that the smaller cities and towns in this area can have a voice in this campaign. So far, we've got Ipswich Gladiators that I've set up, Hertfordshire Gladiators and Essex Cladding Action Group. So we've made a good start, but it'll be really good if Cambridge or Cambridgeshire would form their own leaseholder group and further increase the local press coverage and public awareness in this area. So I launched Ipswich Gladiators in December 2020. At that time, there were only 3 buildings part of our group. And I thought it would be all about sharing knowledge on cladding, getting a couple of articles out in the local paper, and that would be it. However, it has grown into a much bigger project with a wide variety of fire safety defects revealed in this town. And I must apologise, they're testing our new fire alarm today, so apologies for the noise. Okay, there we go. So now, 7 months later, we now have 19 blocks that have been made aware of cladding and/or other fire safety defects. And you may be wondering, how can a volunteer leaseholder group discover this? Fellow leaseholders have contacted us from a number of sources. The first being through seeing our local press coverage and contacting us with questions. Next, it's social media, a great modern tool that we can all use to further increase the public knowledge and to get leaseholders involved in an organised group. And finally, we delivered leaflets into buildings, asking them a direct question. Again, sorry for the fire alarm. So a leaflet, if you can see here, we managed to deliver through into the letterboxes of buildings in the Ipswich area. And through that leaflet, we were then able to increase our scope and awareness, and were able to get other leaseholders on board into our group. Earlier this year, Ipswich Borough Council voted unanimously on an End Our Cladding Scandal motion. And I know that Giles and Dave have covered the importance of getting local councils on board with our campaign. Also, Suffolk County Council have released a statement and sent a letter to the Housing Secretary as a way of showing their support to the campaign. Creating a cladding action group gives you an identity, allowing you opportunities that you may not receive as an individual leaseholder. For example, we all wrote to our MP and received replies in writing. That was a good thing. But a week after forming the group, we had a virtual meeting with our MP, Tom Hunt. And since then, we've met a further 3 times via Zoom and now in person. So having a group allows you into doors and further opportunities that you may not have had on your own. The identity of a group also enables you to keep your building's name hidden if you choose to do so. I can sit here today and represent Ipswich Gladiators without having the need to reveal my building's name. And this is important because some leaseholders understandably are concerned about the negative reputation of their buildings if they go public with their stories. Since forming, we've appeared in the local paper, TV and radio on multiple occasions. And now we've also made a couple of national reports, including, you may have seen on Tuesday, we were on the BBC 10 o'clock news covering the latest announcements with the Building Safety Bill. And in that report, we showed how 14 out of the 19 affected blocks here have developers who have gone bust, folded, or are in administration. So having that group formed and organised enabled us to tell our story to a national broadcaster a clear way, whereas if we weren't that organised group, we probably wouldn't have had that opportunity. Looking ahead, as I mentioned earlier, our desire is to have as many towns and cities having an organised group for the benefits that I've just talked about. So my message to any Cambridge leaseholder or Cambridgeshire leaseholder watching today is that please speak to your neighbours. Try and find out if there's other buildings affected close by. Get an organised group together and start having meetings with councillors like yourself and your MPs. And my message to all councillors listening today is to please support them. As much as we are a campaign group, we are equally a support group. And as Dave covered the mental health aspect of this crisis, it is so important that we are all here to support as well as to campaign about this crisis. And as councillors, you can help a new group get in touch with the local press, whether that's paper, TV or radio. And it will be a great way for the new group to get started and share their stories. Thank you for your time today. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Alex, and also Dave and Giles. If you want to join us again, Dave and Giles, and I will.
I think Katie's frozen.
Philip, yeah. So why don't this to me? Would you like to start with any comments or questions?
This has been a hard one to listen to. Thank you for sharing your stories with us. I mean, something I'm aware of, obviously, but we don't have that as much, I don't think, in South Cambs. But my thought about this is, I've been thinking, where does or how can building control actually help with, I guess, identifying some of these issues before they become a problem? And how do these buildings get signed off, I guess? We heard that earlier on, on how some of these buildings do get signed off. But I'm just thinking in terms of what we can do now to help the situation. But just say thank you. I mean, obviously, if you have ideas, then yeah, happy to listen. I think I probably saw our building control manager is on the call, but you know, that's at least that's something that we could potentially look into hereabouts.
Yes, our director Tumi and I are both working with 3C's building control covering this area, and Heather Jones, I've been having long conversations with Heather Jones and she'll be joining us later today. But yes, I completely, it seems that the horror of Grenfell has just opened up a can of worms, and yeah, it's so shocking. And it just the actually hearing from you about the experience, as Tumi said, is really moving. And I hadn't really, you can't really appreciate the stress that this must be causing until we actually hear from people living through this. So I think I certainly I would be speaking to Tumi and our fellow councillors here today. Katie Thornburrow is a different party from me, and we have an independent councillor who's, I think, coming and going today. So certainly in Cambridge, we are hearing more, we're getting more and more residents, and exactly as Alex, you said, that a lot of them are very cautious about speaking out because of the whole issue about worrying about the value of the properties. So, but the other thing which I think was raised about that the blame culture and the culture of avoidance is causing more problems than ever. And I think the insurance issues that you've mentioned as well is making the blame culture worse, rather than people coming together, really working with everyone in the industry to try and resolve this. So I think it seems, that we have a problem right now with this situation, and we need to stop it happening again, which is what Tumi said. But we also we absolutely have to resolve this. And it seems like, somebody buying a car or a wardrobe or furniture seems to have more recourse to getting something fixed than a homeowner. Maybe Philippa, you'd like to come in, and then we'll go back to Alex and Giles and Dave. Philippa.
Thank you, Katie. I would have only really wanted to say I agree with everything you've said. If I disappear, it's more because I've been jotting things down for Lucy Nessinger, the leader of the joint administration of the county, because clearly we see many new developments coming over the hill, and it is vital that we equip ourselves and our residents with a few more tools for their self-defence, as well as trying to help them. The appointment of building control, many years ago when I was in your position, Katie, I know that we regretted deeply the loss of building control from the Guildhall, where you could go down the corridors of power literally and say, look, what's going on here? This doesn't seem to be properly controlled. And it can now be contracted out, which always seems to me a way of evading responsibility or making it very difficult to get hold of the people who are responsible. Is that still the case? In which case, is there any chance of changing that, do you think, centrally? Is that something that's already being pursued? Put that in the chat if it's not important now, Katie. Thank you.
No. Would anybody with Giles or Dave or Alex want to come back on these?
I'll jump in. Yeah, it's always a strange one with building control. To you or to me 4 years ago, when I thought, okay, I've got a completion certificate, that means all the checks have been done. They've made sure that what the plans were is what's been built, but that's not really the process. So, I mean, we can talk about private and publicly, but I think the difficulty has always been that did they have the right to inspect what had finally been built? Because as far as we're concerned, inspectors didn't have the powers to check what materials have been used. So you went through this whole process of plans being submitted, and then this horrible phrase of value engineering taking place, which would then mean you don't really know what was built. Part of the issue is that you've got an as-built design plans and fire strategy, but then that's not always passed along. So some of this is going to be mitigated or remedied by the building safety bill. However, because that's focusing on over 18 metres buildings, our concern still is that under 18 metres, that sort of two-tier system will still apply, that you'll almost still be able to choose your approved inspector really to sign it off. So we've still got some concerns over the future, but as I say, it comes back to more what can councils do, whether motions that you pass between yourselves. I think that the difficulties Dave touched upon is the whole planning frameworks and European law. We know that it's difficult to say they can't build because of the historical issue. Oftentimes those historical issues are not always developers' fault, it's the building regulations because they're so gameable. But we do try to encourage all councils, look at tender frameworks, can you put something in terms of community engagement that might not be able to stop everything, but it would be a case of saying, okay, are these developers, Urban Splash is one in Manchester, who are still getting approvals, winning awards, despite a number of buildings literally just over there, and less than a mile from me, that have been told they've got to remediate because they've been constructed so poorly. So just to touch on the other side as well, I think that the point that I think Tumi made as well, that it's a coordinated approach that we've been pushing for. So as much as you can say, well, the government basically tries to deal with the media or tries to dampen down the backbench rebellion. So it essentially just says, oh, we've given some money, there you go, now we've ended our cladding scandal. However, the point is there isn't really a coordinated approach. As was mentioned earlier, that costs are going up, the demand on contractors, fire engineers, that's, not insane, but, there's not enough people to do that. So the problem is that we don't really know how long this crisis is going to go on for. They've done it in Victoria, in Australia, in terms of prioritisation on risk. In Scotland, they've got what's known as a single building assessment process approach, where you actually take it out of the industry. So it's not just who shouts loudest, who's got a good relationship to get instructed. It's a case of, we're pushing Boris to take more control. He loves taking back control. So that's what we're trying to do. Thankfully, he's now a bit more interested. He's realised the scale of the crisis and the effect it has on his votes in his blue wall as well. So we keep pushing for that as well. But as I said, there's a lot, the more you can do, within the context of the framework of the law as well, to support that, or to hold those developers to account as well. That would be great from our side. Thank you.
I don't know if Sam Davies is here. Would you like to come in?
Unfortunately, I have missed all of the valuable discussion that's led up to this. I've only just tuned in the last 5 minutes or so. I don't have much to add on the cladding issue directly, but I think what it does feed into is sort of wider issues around trust, and those are something that's a theme that I think we'll be coming back to time and again through today's conversation. And if people don't have trust that things that have gone wrong will be acted on and dealt with, or that organisations are acting in their best interest, then that becomes very corrosive across a very wide range of issues. So I think this sense of identifying problems and then having ways of enforcing solutions to them is really important.
Thank you, Sam. I think the one point I mean, there's absolutely the top priority is saving lives, but we should be going further. We shouldn't be just, planning to ensure that people can get out and that's, it's a great achievement. We need to be able to have buildings that are safe to live in, safe to keep our pets and possessions and to know that we can come and go safely, but all of our, our memories and the things we possess are actually safe as well. It's got to be, something that we can rely on. We're proud. And the mental. The other thing I think we could also take back to our county councillors who are coming and going is the mental health issue. So I think we'll, as councillors, we can certainly come together after this and discuss what we've learned and how we can contact our own residents here. But we will also come back to you as well, Alex, about the process, if we can help our residents here, and we will suggest a group. So thank you so much. It's been really meaningful listening to you, and I've certainly learned a lot. So we're going to have, do you, Alex, Giles or Dave, want to say any more quick words before we have a break now?
I think Heather's got her hand up. Oh,
Heather, please come in.
Thank you. I thought you'd forgotten me for a moment.
Sorry.
So first of all, for those people that have spoken personally firsthand, thank you. On different issues, I've done that myself, and I know how incredibly difficult it can be to speak on things, particularly so personal and emotional. I think what has been said by many about the need to not have blame, a sort of blame culture and a blame game, is probably one of the most important things that's been said today, because as soon as you get into that sort of cycle, it's very hard to get out of it, and it is very unproductive. At the end of the day, there's an awful situation that's occurred, and it needs to be dealt with and resolved, and people need supported. Why things happen can always be looked at a later date if needed. And I'm pleased to hear that you are getting cross-party support as well from some of my colleagues, as well as other members' colleagues on here today. So for those that know me, I'm referred to as a number nerd. I know Councillor Hawkins will know that I like numbers I'm a typical accountant. So I just had one quick question in that I believe it was in Giles's presentation. You said about the 30 million and it not being enough. I'm just wondering, do you have a figure in mind as to what is the right figure, so that we can get a scale of where we're at on it? Thank you, Katie.
It's not necessarily a figure in mind. Our general view is that it's wherever a Waking Watch is deemed required, it should be funded by government, because the issues are, not caused by leaseholders. So 30 million, it's usually an average about 100 grand per building. So you're looking at around 300. But just in London alone, there were 901 Waking Watches reported. I think 675 of those were for external issues. So we've got 153 buildings on evacuation procedures now. So it's not necessarily something I want to say it should be 60 million. I mean, one of the things I would say is 901 buildings, the Waking Watch, you pay VAT, you pay payroll taxes, so you get pretty much 30 million back from that in 1 year. So that's one of the sort of the unfair things, that we're paying VAT, but we're now supposed to be happy to get 30 million. So it's something the NFCC have said as well. We have the Fire Chiefs Council, have regular conversations with them. Simple point is, if you need a Waking Watch, even if it follows this week's, hopeful return to proportionality, it should be funded by government. The alarm installation should be funded by government, because that should move the need for the Waking Watch. So I could do some back of the fag packet type calculations, but as I say, these issues aren't our fault. So why should we pay hand over fist hundreds of thousands to get an alarm installed for them?
Yeah, and if I can jump in there, Giles. The 30 million quoted, 22 million of that is ring fenced for 8 cities across England, leaving only 8 million for the rest of England. So towns and cities like Ipswich and Cambridge will be effectively fighting over the 8 million remaining, just to clarify.
Thank you. Can I come back on? Thank you, Katie. So that's, and I do agree with you on, the financial support, and it shouldn't be on the people in the buildings. I do think ultimately, personally, those that put those in the first place have an obligation as well. So it's just to have that in mindset. So just to clarify, it was about £100,000 of property, you think is the requirement. Obviously those properties may go forward, and does the 3.5 billion that you reference, that I take it that's completely separate, so that wouldn't contribute towards what you're referring to?
Yeah, it's set. So there's 30 million for interim measures. There's no support for insurance, and there's 5.1 billion. But that 5.1 billion is very specific and limited to cladding systems, unsafe cladding systems in buildings over 80 metres. One of the things we've said all along is that part of that risk prioritisation should be, you've got a 90-metre building with a strip of decorative cladding at the top. Should you spend 1.5–2 million to fix that? Or should you fix the buildings 14, 15 metres that are built complete with timber or have got a lot of issues internally? So it's that sort of holistic, coordinated approach that we want to push for. So rather than saying, here's 5.1 billion, we'll get rid of all the cladding, well, why don't we have 5.1 billion to include funding of the risk mitigation, sprinklers? I've got a building in Salford that they've been told they've got no issues on the outside, internal compartmentation issues where each leasehold will have to pay £100,000 to remediate. They're still being told that because the advice hasn't really changed. So that's where it needs to be the certainty of advice from government, which it started trying to do. But the 5 billion, we will still need more. The government hasn't collected the data to really quantify it. So it's a case of, just they'll do a little bit and then say, right, we've done enough. Hopefully we'll push some money out, get it into a taxpayer versus leaseholders argument when it isn't that. So simple point is 5.1 billion is great, but it could be spent a lot more wisely and targeted a lot better on actual risky buildings.
Thank you.
Thank you. Giles, if you have more information about that sort of data, we can put it into the report we're coming out. So thank you, Heather, and apologies for missing you. I've sorted out my screen so I can see everyone's name now. So we're going to have a break and come back at 11:35 to listen to Martin Boyd. So if we